But mixed in among these descriptions are some very moving stories of patients you've taken care of and people that you've met, in addition to your own family story. And I think that one thing that's quite striking about those stories is how different many of them are. And so there must be 30 different stories in the book. I don't. But of them, it's hard to pick. But there's two, I think, which I think show that contrast quite prominently. And I was wondering if you can read from these two sections. And so this is the Soldier's Heart, which is on page 96, and then Intimate Violence, which is on 139.
Okay. A Soldier's Heart. One crisp fall evening, my patient, Richard, asked his wife to drive him to the emergency room of his local VA hospital because he was having palpitations and felt pressure in his chest. Richard was in his 60s, a smoker with high blood pressure, so, as one might expect, the ER staff went straight to work, ordering EKGs, chest x-rays, stat blood tests, and an urgent cardiology consult. Richard's EKG showed atrial fibrillation. Instead of a smooth, steady beat, his cardiac rhythm was erratic, and his heart muscle was pumping inefficiently. He was at risk of having a stroke or his heart failing altogether. The ER staff started him on medication to slow his heart, and he was soon feeling better. Buried in the documentation of his pulse rate, blood pressure, oxygen levels, and various tests was a note by the ER attending that Richard appeared highly anxious. I'd met Richard for the first time a few weeks before. Tall, with a slim build, save for some extra pounds he carried around his midriff, he was dressed in beige khakis and a blue t-shirt. His face was round and pale, and his eyes, framed by designer eyeglasses, were roomy. After settling into his chair, he drummed his fingers on the wooden arm. He was able to admit that he felt entirely out of his comfort zone. "I'm not really sure I need to be here," he said with a nervous laugh. When I asked him to elaborate, he told me that the previous year had been the worst of my life. He was experiencing bankruptcy after his small business had failed. His wife had recently lost her job, which not only had worsened their financial predicament, but was causing conflict in their 30-year marriage. Unemployed for the first time in his life, Richard found himself lost in memories of Vietnam. More than 3 decades earlier, after his discharge from the military, he had thrown himself into a career as an entrepreneur, creating profitable businesses from inspirational ideas. He had spent his life since Vietnam so busy that he had managed to avoid thinking about the war. He admitted to having spent his life in the office, micromanaging every tiny detail, and garnering a reputation in the local community for his angry tirades and tough negotiation tactics. He also admitted with sheepish bravado that there had been years when he had drunk way too much scotch, chain-smoked cigarettes, and avoided sleep by guzzling strong black coffee. His life had ground to a halt with the death of his business. As if the flood of Vietnam War memories was not enough, he was waking up every night in a cold sweat, his sleep ravaged by nightmares, his sex drive had plummeted, and he was finding it hard to concentrate. He felt as though his body was sucked of energy. He was irritable and felt jumpy for no reason. He had ended up in the ER on more than one occasion thinking he was having a heart attack, only to be told that it was just anxiety and discharged home. His worsening finances had forced him to transfer his healthcare from his private doctor to a VA internist. When she had heard about the ER visits, she had immediately referred him to a psychologist. The psychologist had diagnosed Richard as having PTSD and had recommended group therapy. But Richard found himself overwhelmed with anxiety when others shared their stories. "I'm used to being the leader, telling people what to do," he said, not having to listen so much or to be told what to do. His therapist had referred Richard to my clinic for a medication evaluation, and I agreed that his symptoms were severe enough that medication was warranted. Thankfully, Richard needed only a short hospital stay after that fall visit to the ER, to settle his heart back into a regular rhythm. His hospital team did more tests to try to figure out why his heart suddenly went into atrial fibrillation, but could find no obvious culprit other than his severe anxiety. Many months later, after Richard's PTSD was stabilized with the use of the medication paroxetine and the sleeping pill trazodone, he revealed to me that on that fall day, he had experienced, for the first time in his life, a full-blown flashback of his combat experiences in Vietnam. For hours afterward, he had felt petrified, and that was when the palpitations had started. The truly chilling thing is that Richard's untreated PTSD may have flipped his heart into chaos.